It was just another routine flight for most passengers on board, but for Carla and Jamal, it was a day that would change how they view the world. Sitting in their seats, ready to take off, they never imagined their flight would turn into a storm of uncomfortable exchanges, shame, and a forced apology. It all started when Carla, a seasoned flight attendant, crossed the line. A harmless mistake, or so she thought, would set the stage for an unforgettable experience. Introduction to Carla and Jamal. Carla was a flight attendant with over 10 years of experience in the skies. She had worked on countless flights, served thousands of passengers, and dealt with every kind of situation imaginable. From calm, peaceful flights to turbulent ones filled with screaming kids and annoyed adults, Carla had seen it all. She was no stranger to the ups and downs of the job, and for the most part, she handled it well. Her colleagues often praised her for her ability to keep her cool and maintain a professional demeanor, no matter the circumstances. But today was different. Today, Carla was feeling a little more tired than usual. The long hours of flying, coupled with the back-to-back schedules, were starting to take a toll on her. She tried to shake off the exhaustion, reminding herself that it was just another flight. She was in her element and could get through this. But what she didn't expect was the encounter with Jamal and Carla, couple whose vacation flight would be interrupted by a casual yet hurtful comment. Jamal and Carla, on the other hand, were a couple excited about their trip. They were looking forward to spending their vacation in a sunny, tropical destination. This wasn't just any trip for them, it was a well-deserved break after months of hard work and endless planning. They had been together for years and loved traveling together, exploring new places, and making memories. As they boarded the plane, they both felt a sense of anticipation. The seats were comfortable, the view from the window was picturesque, and for once, it seemed like they could relax and leave their everyday worries behind. However, that feeling of tranquility would soon be shattered, all because of a small moment. A feeling of tranquility would soon be shattered. Seemingly harmless interaction with the flight attendant. Carla, as she made her way down the aisle with the beverage cart, greeted each passenger with a smile and a quick word. She'd always prided herself on being polite and friendly, but as she approached Jamal and Carla's seats, something changed. Jamal noticed it immediately. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible glance that Carla shot him and his wife as she stopped in front of their row. He couldn't quite place it, but it felt like the kind of look that someone gives when they are making an assumption, a judgment, based solely on appearance. But before Jamal could think much about it, Carla addressed them with her usual flight attendant efficiency. "Good afternoon, folks. What can I get you today?" Carla asked, her tone polite but distant. Jamal smiled, ready to make his request for a simple soda. "I'll have a Coke, please." "Great, and for you, ma'am?" Carla asked, turning to Carla, who smiled and ordered a ginger ale. As Carla moved to prepare their drinks, Jamil settled back into his seat, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. His gut told him that he had misread the interaction, that feeling of discomfort lingered. Carla, on the other hand, didn't even notice it. She was busy attending to her duties, moving down the aisle to the next set of passengers. But as she walked away, she turned her head slightly, glancing back at Jamal and Carla. That moment when their eyes met was the one that would later come to define the beginning of the issue. Carla came back moments later with their drinks in hand. She placed them on the tray table, her movements smooth, yet there was something a bit off in her manner. Jamal took a sip of his Coke, and Carla reached for her ginger ale. Carla, noticing how quiet the couple was, asked, "Everything okay over here?" The couple exchanged a brief look, and Carla tried to brush it off. She didn't want to make a scene or create any tension. But then, the words came out. seemingly from nowhere. Carla, still distracted, casually added, "I thought you'd go for something a little more exotic. You know, given your type of look. Maybe something more tropical. But no. I guess Coke works for you, huh?" Carla's eyes widened in surprise as soon as the words left her mouth. She hadn't intended for it to sound as it did. She wasn't trying to be offensive, but the second it was said, she could feel the temperature in the air change. Jamal and Carla were stunned, their faces frozen for a moment as they processed what had just been said. Carla, who had been caught off guard by her own words, tried to backpedal immediately. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that. I was just never mind." She began to walk away almost desperately, but it was too late. Jamal's expression hardened slightly. Carla shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing the discomfort in the air. For a moment, nobody spoke. The sound of the plane's engines hummed in the background, and the only thing that could be heard was the quiet rustle of the air conditioning above. Jamal stared at the back of Carla's head as she moved down the aisle, unsure of how to respond. Should he confront her? Should he say something? Jamal shook his head. He didn't want to make a scene. It was just a slip-up, right? He hoped Carla, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had she said that? She had spoken without thinking, and now she had made an assumption based on their appearance. She had let her bias slip through, and in that instant she realized how wrong she had been. As the plane continued its flight, the calm, soothing hum of the engines seemed to fill the space between the passengers. The cabin lights flickered on and off, a soft reminder of the distance between them and the ground, and the rolling clouds that surrounded them. For the most part, the flight was uneventful. Passengers read, napped, and chatted quietly, enjoying the peaceful stretch of the journey. But Carla couldn't relax. The moment that she had let slip from her mouth earlier weighed heavily on her mind. As she made her way down the aisle with the beverage cart, serving drinks to the other passengers, she kept finding herself glancing over at Jamal and Carla, still sitting in the same row. Her eyes kept darting to their faces, trying to read them, wondering if they were still offended or if they had brushed it off. But every time she looked, she saw nothing but silence from them. They didn't make eye contact anymore. They were simply staring ahead, looking out of the window, as though the comment hadn't even happened. That silence nagged at Carla. She knew something was off. The couple hadn't reacted the way some passengers might. Some people would have raised their voices, stormed off, or even complained to the airline's management. But not Jamal and Carla. They were quiet, too quiet. And Carla couldn't figure out if that was a good sign or a bad one. The truth hit her like a freight train. She'd made an assumption about them. She had judged them based on their appearance, based on some preconceived notion of what people like them should order on a flight. In that brief moment of trying to make conversation, she had allowed her biases to slip out. The judgment that she had carried inside for years, disguised as casual comments or thoughtless small talk, had shown its ugly head. Why did I say that? She thought repeatedly, her mind replaying the moment over and over again. As she moved through the cabin, continuing her service to the other passengers, she tried to push the thought out of her mind. Every time she saw Jamal and Carla's stillness, that gnawing feeling grew inside her. The tension in the cabin. Meanwhile, Jamal and Carla had turned inward. The drinks were served. The moment passed. But the sting of Carla's words didn't leave them. Jamal's thoughts were racing, and Carla's silence made him feel even more unsettled. He looked over at her, her brow furrowed as she stared out of the window. It was hard to describe the emotion he was feeling. It wasn't just offense. It was a sense of frustration. He hated that someone had assumed something about them based on their race. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but it still stung every time. This was supposed to be their vacation, a break from the stress of life. They didn't need this, not today. Carla could sense the change in the air too. She wanted to say something to Jamal, to ease the tension, but she wasn't sure how. They both had grown up in different parts of the country, and though they both shared a similar history of facing racial prejudice, this was different. This wasn't some stranger passing judgment on them at the grocery store or the coffee shop. It was a flight attendant, someone who was supposed to make them feel comfortable and at ease, and who instead made them feel like they didn't belong. Deeper Jamal thought about it, the angrier he got. Why did this always have to happen? Why did people assume things based on the color of his skin? Why did they think they knew anything about him and Carla just by looking at them? Jamal could see the frustration building in Carla too. She was the type of person who rarely let things get to her. But this situation was different. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, but Jamal knew her well enough to see that her mind was turning, processing the incident, thinking of ways to move forward. The thing about those silent moments, Jamal realized, was that they were far more powerful than anything they could have said aloud. The lack of reaction from Carla, the lack of confrontation, was what left everything hanging in the air, unresolved and tense. It made the slight feel much bigger than it was. He began to understand how the smallest, offhand comment could fester in a person's mind, build resentment, and linger long after the words had been spoken. Carla's inner turmoil. Carla felt the pressure in her chest growing. The thought of confronting Jamal and Carla about the comment was terrifying to her. She was a flight attendant, someone who was trained to stay calm under pressure, to remain professional and composed no matter what. But right now, she was struggling with something much more personal, her own judgment and the deep-rooted bias she had unwittingly shown. She couldn't stop thinking about how she had made that assumption about them. It was something she didn't even realize she had been doing her whole life, making judgments based on appearances. It was subtle, almost invisible at first, like a crack in the foundation of a building. It was easy to overlook, but it was there, and it had the potential to ruin everything. As the plane continued on its journey, Carla found herself questioning her actions. How many times had I done this before? She asked herself. It wasn't just today, not just Jamal and Carla. It was a pattern, a way of thinking she had grown up with, a result of her own upbringing and the world she had been exposed to. But for the first time, she realized that those biases weren't harmless. They hurt people, and she had hurt them. She tried to convince herself that it wasn't a big deal. Maybe Jamal and Carla weren't even that offended. Maybe they were just going to let it slide, pretend it never happened, and move on with their vacation. But deep down, Carla knew that wasn't the case. She could feel the distance growing between them. It wasn't just the comment anymore, it was the silence that followed it. The discomfort in the air, the realization that she had made a mistake, and no one had said a word about it. As the flight went on, Carla's internal conflict intensified. Every time she passed by Jamal and Carla, her eyes would flicker to them. She was desperately trying to read their expressions, trying to figure out if they were still upset, if they were ever going to address it. But they wouldn't make eye contact. They wouldn't speak. It was then that she knew this wasn't something that could just be brushed off. She had to make it right. She had to own up to what she had said. And she had to do it before the flight ended. But would they accept her apology? Would they even want to hear it? Carla didn't know. But she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't do something soon, the tension would linger. It would grow. And in the end, it could destroy the reputation she had worked so hard to build as a professional who could handle any situation with grace. She had to fix it. But the real question was, would it be enough? The plane had been cruising for hours, and the turbulence had settled down to a gentle rocking. Most passengers had their eyes closed, some napping, others quietly scrolling through their phones. The rhythmic hum of the engines filled the cabin, a backdrop to the tension that had slowly built up between the flight attendants and the couple. Carla, however, couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her. The knot in her stomach tightened with every moment that passed, and the longer she let this uncomfortable silence hang between her and the couple, the worse it felt. Every time she passed their row, she could feel her heart race. Her conscience was screaming at her to do something, to fix the situation before it went any further. She had no idea how Jamal and Carla were feeling, but she could see the distance in their faces. They hadn't said a word about the comment, and she hadn't apologized yet. The unease in the air was thick. Carla glanced over at her colleague, who was busy serving other passengers further down the aisle, and decided that now was the time. This was the moment. There would be no more passing it off or pretending it didn't matter. She had to do something before this ruined the rest of their flight, and before she lost her own peace of mind. Carla took a deep breath and made her way down the aisle toward Jamal and Carla's seats. Her mind raced. What if they don't accept my apology? She thought. What if they're too hurt to forgive me? The uncertainty of their response was terrifying, but she couldn't ignore the wrong she had done. The truth of it weighed heavier than any of the awkwardness she had anticipated. As she walked toward them, the air between them felt almost unbearable. The moments stretched out in slow motion as she reached their row. Jamal and Carla both turned, slightly as she approached. They didn't look angry, but there was still a coolness in their demeanor, a quiet reflection that let Carla know they were still processing everything. They were calm, but the silent tension was unmistakable. She could feel the sting of their quiet disappointment in her gut. Hey, Jamal. Carla said, her voice trembling just slightly. I wanted to say I'm really sorry for what I said earlier. The words rushed out faster than she intended, but she knew she had to get them out. I can see how what I said came across, and that was wrong. It was thoughtless, and I never should have made that assumption. I don't know why I said that, but it wasn't fair to you. She paused, trying to gauge their reaction. Jamal's face was unreadable, but Carla could see him nod slightly, acknowledging her words. The atmosphere was still tense, but now it was more of a quiet understanding. She could feel Carla's eyes on her too, and that made her feel even more exposed. I didn't mean to offend you, and I know that doesn't excuse my words, but I truly regret what I said, Carla continued, her voice steady but sincere. The silence hung for a moment as she looked at both of them, waiting for a response. Jamal met her gaze, and his expression softened a little. He had been bracing himself for a defensive or insincere apology. But what he saw in Carla's eyes was genuine remorse. She wasn't trying to cover her tracks. She was owning up to her mistake, and that made all the difference. Carla spoke up quietly, breaking the stillness. "Thank you for apologizing," she said, her voice calm but with a trace of warmth. "It means a lot that you acknowledged it. Not everyone would have done that. People don't always realize how their words affect others. But we appreciate it." The tension in the air began to dissipate as Carla's words settled in. Jamal looked over at her, and she could see his shoulders relax. He nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we know you didn't mean it in a bad way. Well, it's one of those things that can sting, you know? We all get tired of being judged by how we look or what people assume about us. But we get it, And we appreciate you taking the time to say something. Carla felt a wave of relief wash over her. The words she had feared to speak for so long, words that she thought might make things worse, had actually helped repair the situation. She had apologized, truly, and they had accepted it. It wasn't just an apology, it was a shared moment of understanding, of mutual respect. They didn't just forgive her. They showed her that their empathy was just as strong. The space between them, both physically and emotionally, seemed to close. And for the first time since the incident, the weight on Carla's chest lightened. "I'll let you both get back to your flight," Carla said, trying to offer a small smile. "And I really hope the rest of your trip is smooth. Again, I'm sorry for my words." Jamal and Carla nodded, and there was a shared moment of understanding. They didn't need to say anything else, everything had been said. With a final, lingering glance, Carla walked back down the aisle. She felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The apology wasn't just a way to mend the air between them. It had been a moment of growth for Carla. It had been a realization of her own biases, but also an affirmation of the power of speaking up when you've wronged someone. As she moved on with her duties, she noticed the rest of the passengers more clearly, their faces now offering a sense of familiarity, not just random strangers. She no longer felt like she was walking on eggshells. She had done the right thing, and it felt good. Even though it had been difficult, she knew it was a lesson she wouldn't forget. For Jamal and Carla, the rest of the flight went on without incident. They didn't feel the need to discuss the apology further, but they both appreciated the effort. It was a reminder that people could change, that conversations could be had, and that mistakes didn't have to define someone. The moment of discomfort had passed, and they were left with a shared respect. A quiet understanding that life would move forward. As the plane descended toward their destination, Jamal and Carla leaned back in their seats. The world outside was a blur of clouds and the golden hue of the setting sun. They had faced a challenge, but they had come out stronger for it, knowing that the small moments of confrontation and resolution were part of what made them who they were, more resilient, more connected to the people around them,